Welcome to Culture Crush with me, your host, Dan Dowman, where we get to meet some of the world's leading culture shapers, future makers, and power shakers. We're talking groundbreaking cultures, leadership challenges, and what you can do about them. Today on the show, I'm joined by Tahira Jamani. Tahira, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Really looking forward to being here. Well, I am here, so I'm excited to be here.
So Tahira, we don't know each other well at all. We've connected on LinkedIn, we've had a digital coffee, and we've got to know each other just a little bit. And really, I felt from our first conversation that there was this really strong connection around emotional intelligence, facilitation, wanting to see people fulfill their potential. And I know that's something that you have been developing your skills in. You've got some accreditations, you're building a business around this idea. So why don't you tell us what you're trying to do in the world and why this area is of such interest to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm trying to do in the world is help people get out of their own way so they can do things that they really want to do. Like I want to swear, I want to be like, so they can do epic shit, like the epic shit that they want to do essentially and have the impact that they want to have on the world. But oftentimes we are in our own way. And when you're in it, you can't see that you're your own roadblock. So using, techniques and tools that that I use, like mindfulness, like self-awareness, some of that work where we're more focused on the internal stuff versus the external pieces, is how I help people. And yeah, I just think that the world can be a happier, better place when we start inside.
Tell us a bit about your journey to this point, because there's got to be an interesting story that goes along with this journey, because you've taken a career path that, lots of people want to be coaches, or lots of people want to focus on some quite tactical, tangible things. What you're talking about is stuff that's quite esoteric. It's vocation stuff. It's a sense of like, who are you called to be, which I think some people might think is fluffy and intangible, that kind of falls into that soft skills bracket, which is a term that I hate because I think it's absolutely not true. So why did you end up on this path? Like, what kind of introduced you to this line of thinking, this line of inquiry, if you will? And at which point did you think there's a business in here for me? It's not just like a passion project or a side hustle. It's something that I really want to commit my time and my life and my energy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was one of those that used to think that this stuff was kind of soft and fluffy. And I've quickly learned that these skills are actually hard. Like they're literally hard skills to develop because it's difficult, and requires a lot of courage and attention to ourselves and a hell of a lot of accountability that most people are just fighting. And essentially, the story here is that I was living in Toronto, had my dream job, had everything in life that I was told to have, like the checklist of life, and I was 24 and I started to get really sick coming home from work every day, in my job in HR. I was working 9-10 hours a day and commuting as well, about 75 minutes each way. And I just started getting a lot of stomach pain every single day when I would come home from work. So this went on for months. Like, think crippled over in the bed, don't even know what to eat. I don't know what's going to hurt my stomach, what's going to make me feel good. It was like a shot in the dark all the time. And I ended up figuring out that it was classic burnout, but it just didn't make sense because I was so young and I was a few years into my career. Like I said, I had everything that I was like told to have. So I'm like, yo, I followed the rules. What's wrong here? What's going on? And I ended up quitting my job, moving across the country to Calgary, where my family is, and just taking some time to really understand burnout and stress and how burnout doesn't discriminate. Like it'll hit anyone at any age. You just, yeah, you can't, it won't just omit you because you're following a checklist of of life or what society has told you. So it really made me dig into myself and understand my life direction and my goals and what I'm hoping to achieve. And was I moving in that direction? And something that was really always a driver for me is having impact, like helping other people and having impact in whatever it is that I'm doing. And I was just finding that in my role in HR, I wasn't having enough impact, like pushing paper and, just creating policies and like it just kind of felt like I was going through the motions and I wasn't really helping people. And so I spent a lot of time just kind of understanding stress and burnout. And I went to learn how to meditate because I'd heard a lot of really good, positive things about it. And I had tried all the apps. I tried those 10-minute meditations everywhere, and it just didn't like work as I was told it should kind of work. And I went to a 10-day silent meditation course, and it was wild, like absolutely wild to sit in silence for 10 days. And that was something I was definitely like ashamed of. Like I thought it was really soft and fluffy and would make me really woo woo and kind of like more esoteric because I'm like a gym girl. I like spreadsheets. I like structure. I like spin class. Like I'm not really much of a yoga girl or into that side of things. So I didn't think I fit the bill for it. And going to that 10-day meditation course was incredible. Like it was life changing for me. And I wanted to find a way to share it with other people, but I didn't quite know how. And that's where the Google course came into play. And that's where I was like, this is how I can bring it out to people to help them. I want to help people. I want to help people in this way because it's had such a profound impact for me. And I came across a course developed at Google and based in neuroscience and scientific studies and findings and psychology and business. And it's very well kind of overlaid with all the necessary pieces that make it very, accessible and understandable for people. So it's a mindfulness and emotional intelligence course. So I went on to become certified in that. And that was kind of a changing point between the meditation course and the Google course to know that, hey, this is how I can actually bring it out into the world and make it into that business piece that you're asking about.
So it's almost like there's these two tracks evolved in sequence, right? That you had this kind of spiritual discipline, if you like, or like spiritual practices through this meditative approach. And then as you were on that journey, this kind of like science-based approach kind of presented itself to you, for want of a better word. Like it didn't just suddenly like spring up. You were investigating these things. And I guess at some point you realized that this idea of practice and science, spirituality, and like psychology-led research tactics, it became clear to you that this was a business that you could develop, grow, and kind of give yourself your own trajectory of service, right? Your own opportunity to be someone who was positively impacting the life of others, right? But I'm just wondering at which point, and it may have just kind of evolved over time, but was there a moment where you thought, I'm now clear, I can get this accreditation, I can turn this into an enterprise for myself so I can put food on the table. But was there a moment where you thought, this isn't just a personal practice for me anymore, this is a commercial opportunity, something I can build a life around?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting story around that, which is right after I finished the 10-day meditation course, it was obviously very impactful personally, right? And I understood concepts that I didn't understand before, things like self-love and self-care. And what that actually means to me is just hanging out with yourself and spending time with yourself in a more distraction-free way. And that we don't need to be scared of ourselves and our thoughts. So all of these, bigger kind of concepts became a lot more practical to me. And essentially, like after that course, I felt very empowered to make some changes in my own life. And I'd always wanted to do my MBA. I wanted to I wanted to do my MBA, but I didn't realize what reasons I wanted to do my MBA for. So when I came out of the meditation course, I went to study for my GMAT. I had about 6 weeks to study for it and write the GMAT exam. I mean, I hadn't done long multiplication in 15 years or something. So I'm like going back to basics. Because I don't know, do you ever use long multiplication or long division in your adult life? Yeah, exactly. So I was like starting from basics. I studied as much as I could in the 6 weeks, submitted my application, um, and I submitted to University of Singapore. And my GMAT score wasn't great the first time, but I was like, I'm just gonna submit, see what happens. So I submitted. They called me. I didn't even think they would call, but they called me and they were like, "We like your application, but your GMAT score is not so hot. Like, will you redo it?" I was like, "Yeah, for sure." They said, "We'll give you a month." So I restudied like so much. I studied so much. And I went to write the GMAT and I did worse the second time. And it sucked. It was like heartbreaking because I thought that going to do my MBA was going to solve a lot of life questions for me and was going to be like the next step in life. And so I took some time to list out all the reasons I wanted to do my MBA. And some of them were like, prove it to myself and to my family, to get recognition, to feel like I'm smart enough. And then there were things like leveling up my network, having a global network, elevating my skills, right? Leveling up my skills. And so when I looked at what was really driving that decision, it was the more of the ego and insecurity piece of the recognition. And when I looked at what it was, I was actually after like more kind of valid reasons. I had this listed out in a spreadsheet. And when I had looked at like the more valid reasons, like leveling up my skills, learning something new, having a global network of people to connect with, shortly after I realized that is when I came across the Google program. And that's when I was like, okay, so I can't, like, searching for or kind of filling that void of insecurity and ego and feeding that isn't the route in life. And so even like doing this Google course, I felt just a bit unsure because it's something very different and wasn't very common. And there was no other certified teachers in Alberta, in my province. And so that was really scary to me to be that unique, but also an opportunity that like, hey, nobody else is doing it this way in your province. So why not? And I had seen one of those quotes that said, create what you wish existed. And I was like, yo, I wish that I had access to these tools and these resources before I hit burnout. And it wasn't around or accessible for me. So that's something I wanted to do. So it's a couple of different pieces in there as to how it kind of like sank in that I could make it more of an opportunity and not just a personal practice, but share it with others so that they also aren't scared of having a personal practice or just working within themselves.
So we love to talk about culture on this show, and I know that you've been thinking about your culture crush and leadership challenges and what we can do about them. And I promise you and everyone else that we are getting there. We are going to get to those kind of key themes of the show. But I've got one more question before we get there, and also a quick reflection, because when you were talking us through your reasons for doing the MBA and for going to Singapore, and talking us through the sort of the pain you experienced when actually you didn't achieve the thing you wanted to do, and that realization that there were perhaps these ego driven ideas like validation. I want to prove myself, like I want to prove that this work wasn't a waste of time. I want to prove myself to my family. Really interesting that you were able to recognize that within yourself, and it just got me thinking about some of my kind of like fears or egotistical drivers that I've lived through in my career. That from our previous conversations that I've experienced a number of redundancies in my career. So I've been laid off. For our American listeners or our North American listeners, we call it redundancy here in the UK. You call it being laid off from your job. And I've experienced that a number of times. And for me, that really bumped into a kind of a deeper subconscious pain point for me. And it's this: I have gone through pretty much my whole life with a feeling that I'm too late. I'm too late for something. And what I mean by that is like I'm late for my job. Like I'm pretty timely in
Mhm.
that sense. But I remember when I dropped out of uni. When I was I guess like 18, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I did a course and it wasn't really working out for me, and I dropped out of uni. Then I did some years volunteering for some youth work charities. But I remember at that time thinking, should I go back to university? And I had this fear in myself that said, it's too late now though. Like everyone else is already like 3 or 4 years ahead of you, right? And so at that time I thought, I shouldn't do that now because I'm already going to be so far behind. I might as well, go and get a job. And different points, I'm now 41, and at different points in my life I thought, maybe, I've been made redundant, maybe I should go back to school and study again and try and then I
Mhm.
thought, but you're going to be so far behind everybody. Like you haven't got time for that. Like you need to put bread on the table, make some money, get some security. You haven't got time for that. You're too far behind. And probably, as I over the years, my career has taken some really interesting twists and turns, and I've been very fortunate to have some great jobs and work with some great people, got loads of great experience. There's no doubt about that. My career has been very, very fruitful in other ways. But oftentimes, I would overlook certain jobs or certain opportunities because perhaps they didn't pay well enough, or kind of the roadmap forward wasn't clear enough. And I would think to myself, well, I can't take that more junior position because that would be a step back, and I'm already so far behind everybody else. And so through my career, I can see this fear-based repeating pattern. And there were
Mhm.
certainly points in my career when I thought, do you know, I should probably start my own thing now. And then I thought, but you're like in your mid-30s now, Dan. Like really successful people, like real startup owners, they started in their like early 20s. You're like 2 decades behind these people now. So it's not the right time. And what's really interesting is that when I started Anthem, I finally made the different choice that wasn't so much rooted in that same fear. I've taken a different path now, and I'm
Mhm.
like you, starting my own enterprise in a similar field, caring about similar things. But I just thought it's really interesting reflection of what you've been talking us through with your story in my own,
Mhm.
where that shift happens between the fear that's been stopping you from doing something, or the fear that's been getting in your way, suddenly becoming the opportunity and the way forward. Still got lots of fear in it, but it's a different kind of fear when you finally say yes to the
Mhm.
thing you've spent probably a long time saying no to or overlooking.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you want to come back on it. I know I've sort of monologued about my own story, but
Yeah.
perhaps that
Well,
you feel that's that sense of synergy is a horrible word, but I'm going to use it. That synergy between our stories.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. I definitely feel that. I resonate with that a lot. And I think that's kind of a foundational piece of both of our stories is what I call like the failure syndrome. Like we're just scared of failing, right? And scared of being too late or looking silly or embarrassing ourselves and all these
Mm,
pieces that are actually like the path to accepting ourselves and just living a life of more purpose and impact because money's important, right? But it's not actually the end all be all. Like and when we can place money and ego and recognition and all of those pieces and we kind of dismantle the fear, which is, takes emotional intelligence, which is where I get to work with people in, is we can just kind of get out of our own way and then like go forth. But that fear stops us in our tracks so much. And then all
mm.
these limiting beliefs and things come into play. So I'm happy that we both kind of found our, even though it was like a roundabout, but kind of found our path to, um, yeah, to more of that aligned decision making and aligned kind of path forward that is more fruitful and like feels good for us. So yeah, I totally feel
Mm.
that. And I think so many people will resonate with that as well, in their own lives.
I think what's really interesting about it actually is that when you find a way to say yes to the thing that perhaps you've been scared to say yes to, you do find these interesting, provoking, exciting new connections start to emerge as if from nowhere. You
Mm-hmm.
know, some of the people that I've connected through on the podcast in the last 6 months have literally been life-changing relationships, right? They're people who've dramatically impacted the way I view my business, the opportunities that I've got, um, the way I frame my story, and that's because, I created this podcast and it's given me this great opportunity to meet people. But that only exists because of the business. Like, it only exists because I'm leaning into that sense of vocation, that sense of
Mm-hmm.
calling, if you will. And, I consider you an example of that. When we had our first conversation, there was a real kind of natural, easy, exciting energy between strangers who are separated by thousands of miles, who've never met each other before. And I think we both walked away from that conversation with a sense of, we're probably going to do something. We're probably going to collaborate on a project together one
Yeah.
day based on like half an hour on a video call. And those kind of cosmic, let's say, those kind of cosmic relationships are only possible because we found a way to say yes to the thing that we were previously too afraid to do, or we overlooked because we were having a fear response.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you're going to talk a bit more about some of this stuff kind of as we move on through the
Mm-hmm.
episode. I did say I had one other question. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
abandon that because, well, I monologued for too long and sucked up all our time. But we're going to move on. Now, before we talk about leadership challenges and what we can do about them, I know you've been thinking about your culture crush. So why don't you tell us, it could be a business or a person. And as I always say, you're not endorsing a whole organization by highlighting. It might be a specific thing about a business or a person that you admire. And why don't you tell us about your culture crush and why you chose them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say Google is my culture crush, um, because of the Search Inside Yourself program, because of the mindfulness and EI program. I was shocked to even find that they had something like that. Wouldn't have thought of that considering there's so many engineers and it's that tech kind of, space. So it was really shocking and very bold. It felt like a really bold kind of badass move for them. So originally the program was developed for the employees internally, and then there was so much talk about it and there was so much interest in it. Programs were getting waitlisted and other organizations were also asking for the program too. So it kind of spun off into its own organization to be able to train more teachers around the world to then go out and share this information, these resources. And I think they were early in seeing that as an opportunity to even kind of spin it off and offer it more globally, externally rather, but also to have that mindset to bring it internally to their people. That's really innovative and progressive because it's been years of this, and they were one of the first kind of in the game for it. And there's a lot of people that know about the program, and still a lot of people who don't know about the program. So it's very interesting in that sense. But yeah, I think it's really unique, the approach that they have taken to bring these tools out to the world and make it really accessible and understandable, because there is a science bits behind it. And there are frameworks to it. Like there's like frameworks around how to practice self-compassion and, flow and all of these pieces. And so it's really like a cool way to think about these concepts, right? It makes like compassionate leadership very tangible and very practical, with lots of micro practices for people to put into play so that they are becoming the person that they also want to become, right? It builds a bit of that blending between home and work life, which is now so much more blended than it ever was. Yeah, but long answer short, Google. Plus, I'm a little bit biased because I love the program. So,
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about those different skills and the kind of the frameworks around self-love and the processes that go along with some of these things. I just published recently an episode with my very good friend Justin Foster, who is one of those people who has been really transformational for me over the last 6 months, and the work that we've done together and how he supported me. But in our episode, we talk about the fact that the context in which businesses are operating is changing. The culture, the world around businesses is changing. And at the same time, as the workforce changes and you have a younger generation coming into the workforce, they're expecting their leaders to hit a higher standard in terms of vulnerability, honesty, transparency, respect, well-being at work. And so businesses are in this kind of crunch moment where they're under pressure externally from a widening, changing culture at a sort of meta narrative level, whilst at the same time you've got this Trojan horse of a new workforce who have different expectations around the culture, what they expect the culture to offer them. And for businesses who aren't willing or unable to break away from this sort of industrial age thinking that they've developed with, they're going to come really unstuck. And if Google as a global business can distill and instill some of these kind of practices, and they're one of the biggest brands in the world, it is certainly not the kind of soft stuff that people can ignore. Like, this is one of the most important businesses in the world saying, this is the kind of stuff that we need to develop and focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a bit of a wake up call, really, for businesses the world over to say, well, if they're doing it, it must be kind of important. And I'm so thrilled that you've been able to take advantage of that offer and
Mm-hmm.
and use it as a bridge into your own story of impact and into your own story of supporting others. Now, the last thing that we talk about is leadership challenges and what you can do about them. And I'm sure that this is kind of a connected thread throughout the whole episode. But what's the leadership challenge that you've been thinking about? And take the second point with that. What can we do about it? How can we get practical around that issue?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been working with organizations now for the last 5.5 years in doing my business. Some large organizations, small organizations. I've worked with like GoDaddy and Indigo Books and KPMG and some smaller kind of local colleges here and universities and tech companies as well. And a very common challenge that I see are leaders that struggle to make decisions. It's such a huge, huge issue. And a recent study was done that showed that 85% of business leaders suffered from decision distress. That's huge. That's really huge. It's like, as if if you're regretting a decision or feeling guilty about a decision or questioning a decision, right? They're kind of like just stewing on it and dwelling on it. And as well, the number of decisions that are being made in the workplace has increased tenfold in the last 3 years. So there's like a really crazy amount of decisions that need to be made. And leaders spend at least 40% of their time making decisions. That's a really huge part of a leader's role, an executive's role, is to make decisions and remove obstacles for their employees, right? I also see that leaders who are really like deep caring, purpose driven, impact driven, they want to do right by others as well as themselves. They are overextending themselves to burnout. And so they put themselves last. They want to have an impact in the world. They're very mission driven, purpose driven, want to help others. And it's really sad when we see that the decision-making capability, just even physiologically, like when we're stressed or tired, right, we go into that fight or flight mode, and then we make poor decisions. It's just a fact. And oftentimes we get stuck in that space and can't see that those decisions are not good decisions. I mean, in our world today, we're overloaded with information. We're under-rested. You see companies that say they're like hiring and they're in a growth phase. There's so many things for leaders and executives to focus on, right? The culture is really important, as we're obviously talking about here, and all the different factors that go into culture, which also, as you mentioned, has just been shifting so much over the last few years. right? There's DE&I that needs to be focused on. There's the employee experience. There's the customer experience. There's AI. There's digitization, product development, data. Like there's so many things. And then even on the flip side, if there's a hiring freeze, right, or financial struggles, the culture is still important. People need to feel valued, right, and not overworked. But then we're kind of closing down or not following through with in-person team meetings. We need to be cost effective, right? They need to just manage so many pieces. So when you think about it at that level, like leaders are just being crushed with decisions of what to do because there's so many options. There's so many routes of doing things and ways of doing things. And so what I find a lot of the time is leaders want to make decisions that they feel confident about, right? We want to make decisions that we feel confident about, that they're also using their intuition. And that's something that a lot of leaders don't talk about. But when you make a decision from intuition, you're just like, that's it. You just know it's right. That's where that inner confidence comes from, that inner glow, that inner like, yeah, I got this. And that's something that is developed because when leaders are stressed, they can't access that intuition. It's just like not possible because it's so overloaded with all these other pieces. And that's where, when leaders are going to that fight or flight, that's where the emotion really comes into play. And that's where these skills are so critical because if you're not able to dismantle the emotion or separate the emotion from the fact, you're making poor decisions. So, for example, one of my clients was struggling for a while to decide about letting go of an employee. This was an employee that had been around for a very long time, had kind of been grandfathered in from a previous kind of space of the business and was now in this team. And this employee was a negative employee, created a lot more work for other people, was really having a negative impact on team morale and productivity. And this was a kind of a startup company. So, they were in their growth phase, and this employee was having, even though it's one person, like they have a very large impact on an organization, right? And this leader was having, a tough time to decide. We've been working together for a while, and we got to this place where just one day I just asked him, I said, what does your gut say? And I knew that he was ready for that question because we'd been working together. So I'd asked him, what does your gut say? What do you think you actually need to do at this time? He's like, I need to let her go. And as soon as he said it, he was like, wow, I didn't even really accept or realize that that's what I needed to do. And he was like, oh crap, now I need to go and let this person go. Right. And then we worked through practical ways of having difficult conversations and things like that. And after he let her go, I was also doing one-on-ones with the team as well. Every single person in the team said that they were not necessarily like grateful, but grateful for that decision because there was so much less stress on the team. There was more capacity in the team, actually. It was just felt like a safer space. They respected the leader so much more because he made a difficult decision that needed to be made. He was kind of dancing around it for a while. So it's just really important when we can separate out the emotion from the fact and look at, well, what was the performance, right, of this employee? And like go through all of those pieces to do due diligence that need to be done. But it's really in the nuances of how each person is making decisions. So that's one of the main challenges that I'll say here. And there was a second part to your question.
Yeah, the second part was what can leaders do about it? Like, what's the kind of the action or the solution that people can take in order to engage with this subject area from a practical standpoint? But I had a kind of like a separate question, really, that arrived as you were talking about that situation with the person who had to let someone go. How do you avoid, if you're separating the fact from the emotion, right? One thing that I always say is that I always challenge when people say it's business, it's not personal, right? I don't think that's a very healthy way to go about doing business, because naturally, if you care about your job, you're working hard enough to the point of burnout. You may be really over um, extending yourself within your role. It's not just business for you. It is personal. It has emotion attached to it. And for the person, again, let's not this example, because I imagine that there was real relief in that team by the sounds of it, and it sounds like it reduced a lot of friction for them. But how can leaders check themselves to make sure they're not using it's business, it's not personal, I'm removing the emotion from the fact? How do we stop leaders from also using that mentality as an excuse to then behave in ways that are not very good or ethical or kind or virtuous?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do agree that business is personal, and it's just like you are your whole self at work, right? It all comes with you. Your beliefs, all like your thoughts, like all of that comes with you. So there is definitely an element of recognizing where the emotions are getting in the way, and how you can also use them to deliver information kindly. Like, it's not just like, you're out, like you're you're fired kind of thing. But so I guess, like, when I work with clients and we have these conversations, there are those insights that come around this emotion is getting in the way of making a more sound decision. Yeah, it's really just like seeing how you leverage your emotions. Like, do you use them to get out of having a difficult conversation, which is often the case? Or do you use them to just like trailblaze through and blow things up? And what I find more often, the types of clients that I work with are the ones that are using their emotions to keep them in their comfort zone.
Yeah, interesting. So there's this idea that's emerging through our conversation that, emotion is a tool that needs to be used in the right way. And
Yeah.
you can sort of hide from the difficult decisions, and you can hide from being decisive. You can hide behind emotion. You can use that emotion as a shield that sort of protects you from being exposed to that difficult choice. But at the same time, you can positively use emotion to help you step up to the difficult decisions. Like, you can use emotion really as a driving force, that sense of you're kind of called to make this hard choice. Like, that's a kind of
Yeah.
emotional response to a difficult decision. So I guess really the nub of this is that it's about that self-awareness, observing the fact that you have emotion, you are personally invested in work, and being aware that sometimes naturally you're going to use that to defend yourself and protect yourself from difficult decisions. And sometimes you can use it to help you make difficult decisions, but it starts with that emotional intelligence. It starts with that ability to recognize that about yourself, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also to recognize it about other people. Like, maybe, keeping that employee in that role, in that situation I was explaining, might actually just be doing her a disservice, right? Like, maybe there's a better fit role for her, right? There's different ways to kind of perspective shift it and think about it as well. Because there's nothing easy about having difficult conversations. So yeah, when we're called to have those, or we use it as this is an opportunity for me to step up and be more courageous and compassionate. Like, that's a really fine balance that I work with a lot of clients. Is compassion brings courage because it makes us do that hard thing. And when we circle back to even, what I said in the beginning of kind of my mission here is helping people do the hard things. For everybody, hard things are different. Sometimes it's letting somebody go. Sometimes it's changing, a practice here, or changing a mindset there. Like creating the life of your dreams, like there's different levels of hard for each thing. And that's where we can use our emotions as, like you said, a tool, because I say sometimes emotions are the way and sometimes emotions get in the way. So we need to find that balance. and use it all to make stronger and better decisions and to guide our actions and our behaviors.
So we've covered a lot of ground and we've covered some really, really big issues. I love the way you phrase that, compassion brings
Mm.
courage. And I wonder if for any leader, and there are going to be leaders from all sorts of different backgrounds listening to this episode, if you're a leader and you know that you're making a difficult decision that's going to require courage, in the context of that decision, where can you see compassion? Where have you got compassion for yourself? Where have you got compassion for others? Because maybe if you can make that emotional inroad, that compassionate inroad for yourself, you might then find the courage to make the call that you've got to make. Making the decision, the tough decision, without finding your footing, without finding that foundation in compassion, it might be difficult. So if you're facing a difficult decision, please hold on to that little turn of phrase, compassion brings courage. I think that's a lovely way of putting it. Now, we've talked about, as I say, lots of things: decision distress, burnout, people overextending themselves, people hiding from difficult decisions and using emotion as a bit of a shield to that. But I'm wondering, what's the practical application for some of this stuff today? Like I say, we've covered a lot of ground and we love to bring people into a single point of focus, something that they can take away and try. And with such a broad and fascinating subject, there's probably lots of places you could go. But what's the thing that you would like our listeners and viewers to take away and take action with when this episode finishes?
Yeah, so the biggest piece I would say is awareness. So a process I work through with clients is the 3 A's. So we go through awareness, action, and amplify. So awareness is like becoming aware of how you feel, just starting to check in with yourself every so often and start to notice how it is that you're feeling. And I mean, how many times we're asked a day, "Hey, how are you?" "Good. How are you?" Like, we're just so used to running through that and not actually taking a second to check in. Because when you do check in, it gives so much more insight into how you make decisions, why you do what you do, how you interact with people. It's a really important piece to just anchor in on. And, for example, one of my clients was, he was struggling with having tough days at work. So he would feel nervous in meetings and anxious in meetings. He was a new manager, new director. And yeah, and he would have like 3 out of 5 bad days at work. And, he was working a lot, long hours, wasn't home in the evenings as much as he wanted to be with his wife and his new daughter. Felt that his employees were like they would share a lot with him, and he was happy to help and support, but he also wanted to keep some space and capacity for his wife and for, his daughter, and to be at home. And we were able to realize that the anxiety of the day for him was starting in the morning, right in his morning routine. Because one size doesn't fit all. Cold showers aren't for everybody, right? Like, you got to find what works for you, and it's really the nuances. So we got into that piece and kind of reorganized his morning routine, which takes us to the action step of like specific micro practices that you can do to help. And that's what we put into place for him, specific morning routine micro practices. And then we got into the amplify piece of it having macro effect. So within 2 weeks, he was working less hours, was home every day in the evening for dinner with his wife, had more time in the mornings with his wife, and got his daughter ready and got to spend some time with her in the morning. So like his time was freed up so quickly within just 2 weeks of putting in some of these pieces. But it's really in the nuances, but it starts with awareness. Like, you have to become aware of how you're actually feeling. And the more you inquire within yourself and just ask that question, we will share it, like we as in the body internally, like it will share it with you. You just have to be patient, because many, many leaders and many people have silenced it for so long, maybe your whole life. And it really takes a bit of patience and persistence as well with ourselves, and kindness, to ask those questions. Kindness and courage. Let's add that in there because it's not easy to face ourselves and ask those questions sometimes. So I'd say awareness is the first piece of checking in with yourself, and even just rating, like, out of 5, I'm a 1. If 5 is the best, like, how are you doing in that moment? And really use that information to maybe take a break, or maybe put on some music and amp up your energy. Like, it's all insights. It gives us information.
So interesting. Awareness, action, amplify, but encouraging people to start with that awareness piece. Just bring your attention to what's really going on with you right now, and maybe take a small micro action to address that. And I think it has a nice symmetry with what we were talking about before. Compassion brings courage. I've got a little addendum I want to add on to that, which is compassion brings courage, brings momentum. And
Mm,
you talked with that the example you just gave with that leader that you were working with, that actually by bringing that awareness and taking those micro actions led to some bigger amplifications. It led to some momentum. And in a way, awareness is about compassion. The courage is about the action. And then what happens as a result of that action step is momentum. Now, of course, in the example you gave, it's important that you get really, really granular, and I've kind of taken it to a slightly broader concept there. But I just love the mirror of that compassion into courage, of that
mm-hmm.
awareness into action with the model that you've just talked us through. And I'm sure we could probably spend a couple more episodes talking about the other two pieces in detail, but maybe we'll save that for another time. Tahira, it's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for making some time for Culture Crush, and let's speak again soon.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a culture first leader, be sure to visit anthem.oo because we've got lots in common. See you next time.